Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome back to the show. We are moving right on through January, and I feel like the month is going by so fast. And I'm so excited that you're here with me on this cool January day, depending on where you are. Of course, right before we jump in, I'd like to get the administrative stuff started. So without further ado, of course, if you're looking for support that is of no cost to you, come on over and join the free Facebook group, A Date with Darkness Facebook group, which I will be implementing some changes to that and updating the group. So that's going to be very exciting. If you have questions, comments, or concerns about the show, please email me at adatewithdarkness@gmail.com. You can also visit my website, drnataliejones.com, and sign up for the email newsletter if you are looking for information and tidbits about narcissism and narcissistic abuse. I send out a weekly newsletter every Friday morning. And right now, if you sign up for the newsletter, I do have a free ebook on identifying red flags in your relationships. And so you could check off red flags and then tally up your points and see, just how toxic things are. Just to give you a sense of that in black and white. You might, if you're listening to this, or if you have some suspicions already, you probably already know that your relationships or previous relationships had some pretty significant red flags. But I think that's kind of a nice way to put pen to paper and get you thinking about some things. And also, of course, the individual and group membership coaching is coming right along. So if you want to be in the know when that project completes and when you're ready to sign up, hit that link down below in the show notes and get on the mailing list so that you can be the first to know about it and sign up there. Be glad to have you. And this video, as well as most of the other videos now, are being uploaded on the YouTube channel. That link is also listed in the show notes below. So be sure and check that out if you're more of a video person instead of a podcast person. You could see faces. Sometimes it's nice to see faces or watch video as opposed to just listening to the audio. But I'm glad to have you either way. And if you like this podcast or you find it useful, please help a small podcaster out. Like and subscribe and share with a fellow friend or person in need of listening to this show. So without further ado, I thought I'd dive right into it. And I thought I would talk about how to know when you are being discarded from a narcissist. If you are a longtime listener of the show, you know that I've talked about narcissism and different elements of narcissism over the past few years now. And I've never quite talked about the discard phase. And the discard phase is an interesting one. It's one in which the narcissist has decided, for whatever reason, that they no longer need you or want to be connected to you or want to engage with you anymore. And so they are, making an exit strategy right out of that relationship with you, or they are getting ready to cease contact with you, however you want to look at it. And, it's called the discard phase because that's exactly what it is. It's you are getting left out in the dust, and there's no regard for your feelings. There's no regard for, your desires and what you want. So if you want to work it out and try to, see how things can be if we could work on our relationship. They're not interested in that. And the reason they're not interested is because, their needs have been met. Um, eh, there's a number of reasons why they're no longer interested in that. But I think the most important thing to think about is, they've gotten their needs met, from you to what they feel like is their capacity. They may have moved on and they're starting to see someone else, or something else is going along those lines. But any case, regardless of what they're doing, they have decided that, you know, they've reached their maximum potential with you. You've given them what they need and they no longer need you anymore. Short and to the point, sweet. And brutal as that sounds, that's exactly what it is. There's no feelings about it. This is purely transactional. So again, this is not something that where they're wanting to release you or release themselves from the relationship with care and compassion. It is very, it's very black and white for them. Like, I've gotten what I've needed and it's time for me to go. It's time for me to move on to bigger and better things. So I thought I would do a podcast on, of course, I thought I would dive deeper into, how to know whether a narcissist is going to discard you, or what are some of the signs that you're getting ready to be discarded, and then how you can manage that, because I think it's important to know that you can manage yourself, you can manage your feelings, and you can manage how you cope with the situation. You cannot stop a person from doing what they're going to do, and I certainly wouldn't advise it anyway, because if someone's thinking in their mind like, hey, I'm done with using this person and I'm ready to move on. I've gotten all my needs fulfilled. I don't really need this person for anything else. Then my question is, if you really want to stick it out, why do you want to stick it out with someone who has that type of thinking or that type of mentality, especially when it comes to you? Because I think it's important to note that if they're thinking that way, don't you believe that you deserve a little bit better than that? A lot better than that? Don't you believe that you deserve to be with someone who is completely invested in you? And it doesn't matter if this person is your friend. It doesn't matter if this person is your neighbor or church community member. It doesn't matter if this person is a lover, a spouse, or a parent or sibling. Either way, regardless of what title this person has or they've carried, it doesn't matter. I still think that you deserve to be treated better than that. And I hope that with you listening to this podcast, you do as well. All right. So let's jump right into, signs that, a narcissist is getting ready to discard you. I think one of the first signs, especially if you're in an intimate partnership or friendship or anything really, is you notice that person is slowing down and withdrawing from contact, right? They call you less and less, they text you less and less, or they may text or communicate, in spurts. So that what I mean by that is that they may ghost you for a period of time and then maybe return for a little bit and give, like, I like to call them little weak ass texts. I know I probably shouldn't say that, but that's kind of how it is. The texts are very weak. They're very lame. A lot of times they can be very repetitive or off the topic of maybe they're not even responding back to what you've asked or what you're wanting. So they're just kind of like, they may even be random. So, you know, if you've listened to my previous podcast on ghosting, which I did one on ghosting some time ago, if you remember, and maybe you don't, but when I talked about ghosting, one of the things to note about ghosting is that ghosting is never usually under most circumstances, it's not usually an isolated incident, meaning that, a person just typically just ghosts you out of nowhere. Normally what happens is like a series of many ghosting acts, right? Where a person is just unavailable, unreachable, or they just vanished for no rhyme or reason. And then when they come back, they kind of give you a lame excuse, or they start a fight, or something happens, right? But the issue is never truly addressed or resolved, or the issue is minimized and dismissed as being a big deal, or not being as big of a concern as we've made it out to be, right? And this is exactly what I'm talking about here. When a person is withdrawing, right, they're slowing down the contact with you, communication with you, and there may be long breaks. There may be periods where they just disappear unexplainably, or they minimize it, or they dismiss it, or they don't really answer why they were gone or disappeared. This is exactly what I'm talking about. So this is like the micro or mini ghosting acts that I'm talking about. So this is part of the discard phase. And gradually, over time, and that time doesn't have to be a large chunk of time, but gradually over time, that it just increases the amount of time that they're gone until they don't come back. And, not only that, does the time increase, but if they have been offering excuses, if they have been sort of trying to explain away, those also gradually disappear over time as well. So that's something that's important to note. Number 2 is the smear campaign. The smear campaign is where the narcissist is speaking very poorly about you behind your back. They're basically just tearing you down to anybody and everybody who will listen. They're tearing down the relationship that they've had with you. They may be minimizing it in saying that they were never truly in a relationship with you. They never truly had feelings for you, or they downgraded when they got with you, or, they may just be talking about how you're this or you're that. And so the smear campaign is, it definitely, this is also an action that also increases or is heightened during the discard phase. So they may have spoken poorly about you before, or it may have been like a one-off, or, an occasional thing. Well, now it becomes all the time, or much more frequent, and it becomes much more grand and over the top. And people, they're speaking, the narcissist is speaking about you in absolutes. You're completely this, you're completely that. They never cared for you, or this or that. And so it's very much in absolute terms that they're definitely being degrading with you. And this is done for a number of reasons, right? This is, something that they kind of tell themselves to, again, minimize the impact of the relationship, minimize their relationship with you, but it's also preparation for them as well. A lot of times when narcissists are telling lies, or they're kind of spinning these tales, people, they actually start to believe what they're telling. When you start talking about lying as a pathology, there's something about their character that they actually begin to sort of they begin to believe what they're saying, or they spin this tale, and it makes it easier for them. For someone like you, or like me, someone who may be listening that's very empathic, lying is very challenging. Lying is something that it requires for the normal person, without any sort of psychopathy. It takes a lot of energy and effort. You have to think think about it, you have to keep up with it. And you gotta, you might even have like a guilty conscience. So you might have told a lie and you just really don't feel good about it, or you're like really thinking about it and maybe stressing about even possibly going against the lie that you've told and coming clean, right? Because it's bothering you. Well, when you start talking about someone that has the pathology of a narcissist, lying definitely becomes like breathing for them. So it's something that they're conditioned to do, and it's very easy for them to do. In fact, it's more of a relief for them to do that as opposed to telling the truth, because lying um, is a way for them to keep distance. It's a way to create this emotional barrier or this distance or this guard, and never really truly allow people to see who they are, never really truly allow people to come in and be close to them and have intimacy with them. And so there's always kind of like a mask that they have on, and so you can never really know too much about them. So each person that's in their life knows a little bit about them, but no one truly knows who that person is at their core, and they do that for a reason, and lying is a part of that, right? And so if they're creating this smear campaign full of lies, right, they are literally tearing you down. And in their mind, they're tearing you down to make it seem like this relationship was nothing to them also. And this helps them to prepare to get their foot out the door, right? um and so yeah, so the third thing I should mention is part of the discard phase. And of course, I have my handy dandy notes here. So if I'm looking down, if you're watching this on video, that's what I'm looking at, is the notes. But the third thing is that the narcissist is focused on destroying or eliminating you, right? And so what that means is this could be, and often it's not a good thing if you have this type of person in your life. This person is someone who has the mentality of, if I can't have you, no one can have you. If I can't be with you, no one could be with you. Oh, well, if we're gonna end things, I'm going to destroy you and everything about you. And so this is more the destructive component, the rage component. This is where we can see things like violence in a narcissist. This is where we can see acts like stalking, which is the person watching you and doing things like this, right, as even though they're leaving, they still may be watching you from afar, right? Or they still may be keeping tabs on you, or they may even have someone else that's part of their camp, right? Which we call them blind monkeys. They may have someone else that's kind of reporting back to them, hey, so and so is now seeing such and such, or I saw so and so out with someone or something like that. So they may have mutual people that know you and then report back to them. And so they may then become very destructive about the relationship. And again, even if they're on their way out, you would think that, hey, this person is on their way out the door. They no longer want to be with me. They have made it clear that they no longer want to be with me. And it's not about them not wanting to be with you. This is them viewing you as an object. This is them viewing you as a possession in which they can do whatever they want to with. They can dispose how they like. They can treat it how they like. So this is them objectifying you as a person. This is about them not having boundaries. And then this is also about them wanting to be in control, right? So this has nothing to do with you, but all about this person wanting to control you and control the outcome, and just making sure that no one else has access to um, you after they're done with you, right? And so you may see violence, or you may see uh, paranoia, or you may see the temper start to escalate, or you may see that when you do have a conversation with this person, that it often the conversation very quickly turns and it becomes a blame game. It becomes an accusatory conversation where they're accusing you of doing something, even though you didn't do it in their mind, just because they said it, or they start to convince themselves that this happened or it was this way, even if it's not reality based. Once again, kind of how I was talking about our narcissists believing their lies, the same thing is also true here, that this is their perception of what's actually happening, which may not be reality based, which then informs them of, hey, let's be destructive. So this is their excuse. So this is, whether it's perceived or imagined reality, and regardless of whether it's either or, it still doesn't give them the reason to act out destructively, but in their mind it does. It justifies their actions, whether or not the actions are imaginary, right? And again, it alleviates or removes blame from them, and then they're blaming you for their actions. So it's not uncommon for you to hear a narcissist say in a situation like this, well, if you hadn't have done this, then I wouldn't have reacted that way. It's because of you. Look at what you made me do, right? And so they're projecting the blame on you for how they have lashed out and acted inappropriately. All right. And so the fourth thing that a narcissist would do as they're preparing for discard is that they're seeing someone else, right? And so a lot of times you will hear that narcissists have people on rotation, right? And what that means is, while they're seeing you, they're already fostering a relationship with somebody else, meaning that they are preparing to leave you. And so they're already grooming someone else. They're already fostering a relationship, an intimate relationship, or a sexual relationship, or a relationship where they can quickly move into someone else's home or something of the like. They're already starting to foster that relationship. And so essentially they've got one foot out the door. And again, this may go back to what I was talking about in the first bullet point, where I was talking about some of the micro ghosting. Some of the micro ghosting may occur because the narcissist is already starting to foster or a relationship with someone else or see someone else, right? And so, when they do reappear, they're starting to see you again. And, it might not just be just one person. They may be seeing several people and fostering relationships with several people throughout the duration of your relationship. So again, that's something to keep in mind, that as you are starting a relationship, they may already be having several relationships going and not be able to fully commit, because they know that once the honeymoon phase wears off, or whatever wears off, for them, the immediate attraction, right? It might be the immediate attraction. It might be that, hey, I just need to have supply from several individuals at one time. So my needs may need to be met by several individuals at one time. So it's kind of like I've got to juggle all these balls in the air, right? And every now and then I drop one, and that's okay. I could lift it back up with my foot and throw it back in that juggling act at a later time. So that's kind of how I like to think about, is like a juggling act. But again, there's always one foot out the door there. But they've already started to foster relationships, and that relationship may be sexual, it may be monetary, it might be meeting the need of living with someone else. Whatever it is, they're getting the need met And it doesn't mean that that relationship is better than you in any way. It just means that they have now found someone else to use for their own personal gain. Okay. Um, the fifth reason, the fifth thing that I will point out is that narcissists are preparing to discard you when they are intentionally creating chaos, just so that they can have an excuse to leave. And what this looks like is this person is starting a fight. They are accusing you of things, and it just seems to come out of nowhere where they just kind of create chaos. They may accuse you of doing something out of thin air and then use that as a reason to justify why they need to take a week off from you or why they need to take a month off and not speak to you, right? So they intentionally create this fight or this blame game or some sort of chaos where, they may act out or lash out, and use it as a reason to justify leaving, right? Again, going back to the micro ghosting. But just so you know how that looks, that could be looking like a fight that starts out of thin air for no reason. It doesn't make sense. So if you're having all these things that kind of pop up that they may be accusing you of, or they may just be starting a fight or just be irritable or angry, and it seems to just be coming from nowhere, that's exactly what I'm talking about here. All right. Number 6, cleaning out bank accounts. So if what a narcissist will do that financially abuses you, that is financially abusive, will continue to push the boundaries of financial abuse over time. And so what that looks like, you know, here's a little tip that I got from you, and I'll give this to you. Um, from when I used to work in corrections. I used to work, with inmates, and inmates can be very manipulative. And a lot of times, what inmates will do is they will test you to see what they can get away with, right? And so, how that may look is they're going to gradually increase in pushing the boundaries and pushing the limits by doing things that they're not supposed to do. So for example, at the corrections facility that I work at, I'm not saying that this is the case for all, but I know for the ones that I work at, you're not supposed to give inmates personal items. So, you're not supposed to give them, pins or, office supplies or things like that so that they could have, right? You're not supposed to do that. So what an inmate may do to test you is to ask you for a pencil. Hey, can I have a pencil? I just need it to go back and write something or do something, right? So they may ask you for that by pushing the limit, right? And that's purely manipulative, because one of the rules is you're not supposed to ask for things that you're not supposed to have, right? And so this is the same thing here. And they're testing you to see if you will give them that, and then they'll escalate. Next thing you know, you're bringing in some pretty serious contraband and things like that, right? So it's limit testing to see how far can I test this person, what can I get this person to do for me. They're not asking you this because they don't know right from wrong or because they don't know the rules of the game. That's not how it works. People that do this, when they do this, they clearly know the rules are. They're just seeing how far that they can test you. The same thing also applies with a narcissist in finances. A lot of times what will happen is that there are signs that a narcissist is financially abusive, right? And so what they may do is they may do like small things. They may do small things over time to indicate that they are financially abusive, but we may dismiss it or minimize it. So small things may be like they may take money out of your purse without asking, right? It might be a 5, a 10, or 20, right? Or they may charge something on your card without permission, right? And it may be some nominal amount, and they may give you an excuse when confronted about it, and you let it go, right? Um, or it could just be these things that are gradually increasing over time, right? And a narcissist perspective on money is this: my money is my money, but your money is my money too, right? And so they're not up for being understanding about it, but they believe that if they want something, it's theirs for the taking. And so again, there's going to be these boundary violations, which might be minimized or dismissed, or you may start to justify by saying, hey, this person's a good person. Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe they made a mistake, and blah, 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 blah. And so when they are on their way out the door, it's usually they get more bold and a lot more brazen and a lot more selfish, right? And so it's like they've got nothing to lose. They've tested the limit up until this point. So they're going to take the entire pot of gold. So this is going to look like cleaning out bank accounts. This is going to look like stealing 401ks, or, taking things, some sort of big financial thing. This may look like selling your house out from under you, or something of the sort, that's something that's completely illegal. But there again, this is a person that doesn't have boundaries and thinks that the rules don't apply. And so they definitely financially may take a big haul with them as well, or or they may leave you in complete financial ruin. And so what that means is they've already gotten what they need from you, right? And so they've drained you financially, and now you may be expressing to them that, hey, you don't have any money anymore because this relationship has drained you financially. Guess what? They don't care. And guess what else? When you say you're out of, when you're telling them that you're out of money, maybe you need a little help, or maybe you're actually encouraging that person to get a job or somehow help you pay back this debt, or get, right this ship, so to speak. They're gone. They don't care about you and your financial well-being. All they care about is whether or not you have money, and if you're able to give money to them to meet their own selfish need. And so when that runs out, they're also gone. Number 7, when the rage against you becomes super intense, and rage is a very serious thing. It's very different from anger. And rage is like this over the top lashing out, and it's inappropriate, in which a person almost seems like they can't be stopped. And it could be set off for narcissists. It can be triggered very, very easily, right? And so when they're preparing to discard you, it could be that their rage intensifies and that it's all the time. Their rage intensifies and that it becomes physical. It becomes, they escalate in the verbal or emotional abuse, but somehow the rage is, just note that the rage is very, very intense. And again, this goes back to, in their mind, they're chalking you up to be a bad person. This is making it easier for you to be thrown away like nothing. And so again, it's not something that's logical or has any sort of rhyme or reason to it. Just know that those symptoms are intensifying and can become very dangerous, and in a lot of situations, very lethal as well. So that's something to be mindful of. And it could just be that they come home and they go through this rage, or it could be that when you are around them, that you're noticing that you're walking on eggshells, because you don't want them to become disruptive. And it could be to the point where you're just afraid to even speak. So, and lastly, um, number 8, which I've kind of mentioned this before, um, but I'll mention this again in its own separate point. You said the narcissist does not care about the consequences that you endure because of them leaving. So if there's any sort of financial hardship, if you have any sort of heartache about the relationship leaving, if you have children together, right? If you have children together and the children are now without a parent. They don't care about that. They don't care about how traumatized you are. They don't care about how depressed or anxious you are if you can't get up and go to work the next day because you are um, uh, experiencing emotional hardship, and it's very tough for you to be without this relationship. Again, they don't care, they don't want to hear it, they don't want to talk about it, they're not interested in how you feel. They're more interested in getting their needs met elsewhere. And so that's kind of how that ends. And I know that that stuff is all very rough to hear. It's very disheartening to hear that people can be that way, can be so cold, can be very calculating, be very mean and very destructive, but it does happen. And so those are my signs of how to know that someone is preparing to discard you. Now, I want to talk a little bit about things that you can do to help yourself during this phase because, I've personally been through relationships where I've gotten discarded, and it certainly doesn't feel good, right? Because the first thing that happens is you're kind of questioning your sanity. You're like, am I tripping? Is this person like fading into the background or like disconnecting from me, or somebody may tell you something about what the other person said, or you know financially your credit or your finances are ruined because this person has completely drained you somehow and they don't even care. You could just be hurting, you could be struggling, you could be working 10 jobs and they don't care how you get it, or what's happening to it. And just be very destructive in that way. So I've certainly have experienced it, and I know that it doesn't feel good to hear this stuff, but it does happen. You're not alone when it happens. Because it happened to you does not mean um, that there is something wrong with you, or that you deserve for this to happen somehow, or that you were stupid. This is something that I often hear, is that I was stupid, or people said I was too trusting, and therefore I deserve what I got. That's not the case. And it's interesting that people only make that rational. People only justify it. It kind of let me think about how I want to say this. I have to say it the politically correct way on the podcast. It really grinds my gears when people justify another person's abusive behaviors towards you because you were a nice person, or because you were a trusting person, or you wanted love, or you wanted to be in a relationship, or because you were married, or because you were a parent. Just because you're a good person, you being a good person, you trusting someone, does not justify their actions of hurting you. And I want to be very clear about that. And I'm gonna paint another picture for you here to hopefully drive that home. When I was way before I started the therapy career, I worked uh, for the Humane Society, and I worked for Animal Hospital many, many years ago. It seems like a lifetime ago now. But I spent a good chunk of time volunteering and working with animals, and it came across a lot of animals that were abused, abandoned, and neglected. And it's amazing to me how cruel people can be to animals. But it's also amazing to me how people come together for animals. And that what I mean by that, I've never once heard a person say, your dog, that dog was nice to that person. Therefore, that dog deserved to get starved to death because that dog wasn't being smart about who he was nice to. Never once heard him say it. I've never once heard people justify cruelty to animals. In fact, I've seen people get very enraged over cruelty to animals. And I'm not saying that, I'm certainly not justifying one over the other because I don't think people should abuse animals or human beings. But I'm saying all that to say that I've never once heard a person justify abuse to animals. So that's something to think about. So I want us to get out of that whole blaming you being a good person or trusting or loving someone as the reason for them being abusive to you. That doesn't excuse that. But anyhow, let me get off my soapbox there and get on with ways that you can protect yourselves and sort of manage this your emotions and just manage yourself while going through the discard phase. I think the first thing to do when you're getting discarded, i- if I could go back and rewind the clock, I'd be honest with yourself about what's going on. There's a lot of times when people will tell you who they are and what they're doing and be as clear as day about what they're doing, but we don't want to believe it because we're so focused on the potential. We're so focused on the outcome. But what I'm suggesting to you is believe it when a person tells you who they are. Believe it when a person's not when they tell you who they are, but when a person's character is showing you who they are. If their character is showing that they only come around when they want money, if their character is showing you that they only come around when they want sex or they're using you, believe it. Believe it. And just accept the facts of what's actually going on here. Let's not romanticize, but let's accept the facts of what's going on here. The same is also true when the person is going through the discard phase. Accept the facts of what this person is doing to you. So if they're withdrawing, if they're treating you like crap, if they're not there and the excuses are lame, be real with yourself about that. Like the excuses are lame, but also get back to thinking about, hey, is this acceptable to me that this kind of BS is happening right now? Like, is this acceptable to me that they are that they're really telling me this right now after the expectation and usually what happens is the expectations are usually never the same. The expectation is usually that they want you, the narcissist, to be all in and 1,000% invested in the relationship. Meanwhile, they kind of get to come and go as they please. So, is that acceptable to you to be treated that way? All right. So, start thinking about that and be honest with yourself. Write it down, you know, even if that person tells you that you're crazy or whatever, keep little notes for yourself. Write it down, write down what's happening, write down the behaviors that you're noticing. If you have, um, if you have, if you're on a semi-amicable, um, like if you're still wanting to engage or you're still engaging with this person and it's semi-amicable between the two of you. And I say semi because I mean, meaning that they're not raging, they're not going off on you, but maybe they're just kind of aloof, they're distant, they're ghosting, and they're kind of giving up excuses, but you're wanting to maybe talk about it a little bit. And again, I don't me personally, I think, it's not as beneficial to talk about it per se, to try to get some truth from them or any sort of validation, because you're not going to get that. But what you can do is you can speak to what you're noticing. I'm noticing that you're not around, and that you weren't around on X, Y, and Z date. And these are kind of the excuses that you're giving to me. And this is what I'm noticing, is that you seem to be disconnected and just withdrawing more. And I just wanted to speak to that. And what that does is it lets them know that you're noticing these things, and you're noticing that there's a pattern. And again, I wouldn't expect much in terms of accountability, or in terms of telling the truth, or them validating what you're saying. But you can also just use that statement and get information, collect the information. So if what they're reciprocating back to you is, one, they don't even respond. Two, they respond to something that you weren't even talking about, so they're changing the subject altogether. Or three, their response is minimal or just doesn't really add up. I think that gives you the information to let you know what's actually happening, right? They're not being honest, but they're being disconnecting. They're disconnecting, but they're not being honest about what's going on. And that should then clue you into what you need to do. I would, thirdly, I can suggest creating some distance, right? Separating yourself, like if they're gone, let them go. A lot of times, what tends to happen during the discards phase is where the narcissist was once heavily pursuing us, and now they're being aloof and distant, we then become the aggressor. So we then start to heavily pursue them, right? Because we then become anxious, like, hey, where'd you go? What's happening? Why are you gone? Or why are you not responding? What's happening with us, and how can I get it back on track? So you're kind of like doing that, so that sort of anxious spiel about how to get the relationship back on track, right? But when someone is giving you a lot of distance, my suggestion here is to mirror what they're doing, and also creating distance in the relationship. So that means that they're not contacting you as hard as it is, or as hard as it may be for you. I would suggest that you also keep that same distance and not contact them, right? And I would also recommend, if you can, I don't know what everyone's situation is, so there may be kids involved, there may be other things involved, etc. But if it's just you and that person, and you guys don't really have anything together that ties you together other than the relationship, but this person wants to feel like they can come and go as they please, I would put a stop to that. And there's different ways in which I suggest doing this in the group membership coaching, but I would put a stop to that. There's no open door or foot in the door policy here, which means that you cannot come in and out as you please and have access to me only on your terms, and then be missing when I'm requesting access to you. So that's not allowed here. Of course, I always like to recommend starting therapy when doing this, when doing any of this, or when going through this, or just being in a relationship with a narcissist at all. That's a form of support that you will need, and it's good to have that in place as early as possible. I would also recommend getting support in as many other ways as possible. So, if you isolated yourself from friends and family, start to try to reconnect with those friends and family if you can. Start fostering new relationships. Again, your therapist is going to be another relationship, and just start to create a support system. A support system is important because it helps one, hopefully, if you're utilizing them, it keeps you busy. A lot of times we kind of want to go back to a person that's discarded us because we're feeling lonely. We might feel like we have an unmet need. It might be a sexual need. It might be a physical need. We might just want to be held. It might be an emotional need, like this person was here to talk to me when I came home from work and blah, 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 blah. So we want to create a support system so that we don't fill that void, which then causes us to want to run back to someone or something that is no longer good for us and doesn't work for us. So it's going to be a good idea to make sure you take care of yourself in that way. All right, folks. So let me know what you think about this episode, and let me know, I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether or not you've experienced discard, how you've experienced it, and how you handled it. So thank you so much for listening. I want to wish you guys well, and I hope that you guys take care of yourselves and you stay safe. Omicron is still raging out there. So be sure to take care of yourselves. And until next time, stay safe and be well. And thanks for coming.